Hey, Nathan. Let's start our discussion with where do you see innovation today in the construction industry?
Yeah, that question comes up a lot, and obviously technology is at the forefront of that. There's so much technology being thrown on us, but I think the deeper we get into those discussions, we find that it really comes down to the process, the lean process, and are we in the right systems to be innovative and to be really driving forward with technology? And do we have the right people? Do we have the right leadership? Do we have the right culture? Do we have the right incentives to drive this stuff? So yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation and really dig into the softer side of construction technology and where things are going with innovation in the industry. But a question, just throwing it back at you, because again, a lot of my things are anecdotal and where I come from, and everything with Dodge is about having data and having the numbers behind this. So with the numbers that you're looking at, I'm curious, what are some of the key takeaways that you're seeing from the studies?
I know we wanted to focus a little bit on safety for this conversation. So I was going to focus mostly on the takeaways from some of the safety studies we've done, because we've been doing a series of safety studies with CPWR since 2012. So we've got this really great time set. They're about every other year. There was a gap of a year for one. And some of the things we just see kind of when you take a step back and you look at it, we when we started out, one of our goals was to really demonstrate that in addition to all the really valuable things that are associated with improving safety having to do with worker health, that there were real business benefits of safety. And those studies have really conclusively shown that. We consistently found in the 5 or 6 studies that we've conducted that you see improvements on safety elements such as recordable injury rates and worker willingness to report unsafe conditions, but you also see business improvements. Things like improved worker retention are widely reported across all the studies we've conducted. The ability to bring in new work for many contractors is influenced by what they're doing in their safety program. Getting better insurance terms, of course, is very important for contractors, huge impact on their bottom lines. And then there's standing in the industry, which impacts a lot of different things, both their ability to get new clients and keep current clients and their ability to draw new workers. And finally, we see a lot of them also reporting that they see their safety efforts really having a direct impact on their project quality, but also on the performance of the trade contractors who they work with. So, well, at least the general contractors. So, you really see this kind of overall picture. And it's funny because we feel like that's so well established now that when we do the next report, we're moving away from that a little bit and digging into some deeper elements. But some of the other things that we've seen emerge, around the 2017 report, we really saw a focus shift from practices onto really getting workers engaged. And we've seen that remain steady. That it really rose from just being one of the many things that they think about to one of the top things that they think really distinguishes a safety program is its the degree to get which it can get workers involved. And we really also have been tracking technology on these reports quite a bit, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more. And when we did the last report, we see that we've seen constant engagement with technology. Interest in technology is very high, but adoption is still slow. And I think for a lot of reasons that I'm sure you're going to touch on too. One of the only technologies we've seen used by more than half in the last study was BIM. I mean, other than that, everything was used by less than half. But we do see, even though we see really low levels of adoption right now, we're talking 10% or less, we see really high interest in wearables, in using virtual reality for training, and in visual monitoring and using AI with that. And so, and these are also the same technologies that the respondents think are going to have the biggest impact on safety if they're able to be implemented. So we again, that contractor interest, I think people tend to represent contractors as a little technology resistant, and I think our studies consistently undermine that. There's other factors that are preventing it, but it's not a resistance to using technology.
Well, Don, a real
Um,
quick note on that, if I can interrupt, because I think that point on 10%, if you look at that innovation adoption curve, this term crossing the chasm is around 15 to 17% adoption. So again, while we may think that 10% is small, that's not that small of a number per se. That's getting closer and closer to that 15 to 17% where it really starts to catch hold. And then all of a sudden, like Facebook or iPhones or everything else, everybody's, got it adopted. So just a quick point on that. But I love all this
Oh,
data.
that's an excellent point. And the only other point, actually, I was almost done too, because the only other point I wanted to make, and this actually comes as much from the latest civil quarterly as from our safety studies, is that one of the big challenges, though, is that they're still reporting that most of the safety data they gather manually. And that obviously has big limitations in terms of what they can do. There's interest in analysis, but you can only do so much with the tools you have. And with that, I really want to throw it back to you and see how you think technology as a whole has impacted safety on the job site. Where has it helped? Where has it hurt? What are you seeing going on there?
Yeah, and really, when you say technology, what I hear is data, right? How is the collection of data impacting safety on the job site? And you have to say, as a whole, it's improving it, right? The more you measure it, the more you're aware of it, and the more it starts to change those behaviors. But also, there can be unintended consequences as well. There can be impacts on productivity. It can create, more data entry than maybe you had before, and so there are kind of other forms of waste. And so I think it brings up this very interesting conversation with safety as such a core principle to what makes construction important. I mean, getting home safe is paramount to everything. But with all this technology that's around us, that it's not a distraction, that we're actually using it to measure the right things and deliver us feedback that's actually making us safer. It's a fine line to walk for sure.
Yeah, I mean, do you really find before that you
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
going?
let's
I'm
go.
just curious. I think one of the things that we see is a big challenge, but we don't have any data on it yet. So I want to see where you stand anecdotally. Is there's just so many options out there too. There's a million different little toys. So do you find that that's the case too?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just our industry. I think Okta is a big software security provider that mentioned how many average applications that the industry uses. I think it's like over 200 applications per industry or per industry corporation are installed on their servers, on their systems. There are so many apps because frankly everybody wants to have their own app, right? It's not that everybody wants to have one, but they want to have their own. So we're very much in the same challenge that was in the early days of data standards and trying to get everybody on the same page, that you got 15 standards and somebody wants to bring one more new one in, and it's like, well, guys, we're not solving the problem here. So I do think,
Mhm.
yeah, with technology we are getting to a point where when we understand the core root of standards and data and what matters to us from a measurement standpoint, it will become easier to select the technology that best fits those needs. But I think right now we're out hunting for the best technology. When you say best is very relative. So there's a lot more, I think, searching internally to determine what your best is. And then the selection becomes easier and easier. But yeah, I think moving into, speaking of measurements and moving from safety, moving into healthier buildings,
Mhm.
becoming again a lot bigger part of the conversation. When I was an engineer, it was LEED certification was a big thing. I know well is a big measurement thing as well. I guess what are you seeing in the market when it comes to healthier workers, industry engagement with the health of those workers? What are you seeing?
Yeah, yeah. So we started seeing a real focus on health in terms of buildings back in like 2015, 2016. We did some research on that and we really saw well take off in a huge way in that time frame. And now then the pandemic came along, right? And that really locked the conversation for healthier buildings. But we didn't find it created it, you know. And in fact, when we did research on our World Green Building Trends report, we did see growth after the pandemic in the interest in healthier buildings, but it was very much in line with the growth we'd already been seeing. So, it just kind of reinforced a direction that the industry was already going in. But healthier workers, now that's a very, very different question. And I'll be honest, we didn't look at it really before the pandemic ourselves. So I can't say for sure, but it does seem like the industry conversation is circling around it much more tightly. There's much, much more engagement. And certainly our research suggests that there is a big shift going on. In the last Safety Smart Market report that we did find that, right now, it's actually pretty common for a mid-size or large contractor to report that their workers have access to at least one type of health and wellness program. The health and wellness programs we asked about included alcohol and substance misuse programs, mental health services, stress management, and smoking cessation. But what's interesting is, when the industry is really trying to grapple with substance misuse, right? And we've seen, and that was by far the most widely adopted of all of these programs. A lot of companies were offering that. When it comes to more proactive programs like stress management, we do see much, much lower adoption levels, only offered by about a quarter, where well over half are offering programs addressing addiction. So, that's sort of, you can see the industry's kind of starting to get there, I think,
Mhm.
is what our data suggests. And one important change we noticed, even though the numbers aren't huge, but I think it's sort of significant from the pandemic, is we asked them about their pandemic policies, and one of the things that a lot of companies were doing was providing flexibility about absenteeism due to illness, right? Because they didn't want people coming to work with COVID, right? But 20% said that they were going to continue offering that kind of benefit after long after COVID was over. So, again, 20% is not the entire industry, but it suggests it's a big enough number that it really can impact a lot of workers' health if they don't feel, construction, it puts a lot of pressure on productivity, and it's really, really hard not to show up for work. So the other thing that we looked at, we did just take a little dive into mental health in our latest Civil Quarterly that came out in January. And we found that a little bit over a third offer some resources that specifically address mental health. But they really, there's far more think that more is needed. Half of those who say that they're already offering it say, yeah, we need more. This isn't sufficient. And we really found there that training is underutilized too. That more than twice as of those who feel that, hey, getting our leadership to understand the importance of safety, getting our supervisors and managers to know exactly what kind of things to do that can address mental health, that can really recognize symptoms of suicide, things like that, ways to help employees. They really don't feel that there's a bigger group that think it would be effective than those who are actually offering it. In fact, only about half of those who offer it versus those who think it would be really effective. So really just getting more training out there, it seems to be something that the industry itself really wants and is calling for. And one of the real interesting issues is stigma. Now, we couldn't measure, that's a hard question to ask. So what we asked them is what they thought would help deal with the stigma of it. And we gave them a bunch of options, like, we normally do. Less than half selected any of the options as something they thought would be effective to eliminate stigma. So I think you can see that, whether or not there's there's some difficulties even recognizing that there's stigmas attached to it, but also just like, what do you do? How do you change the culture enough to allow an open discussion? I think is a really big challenge. And I just want to finish with one point, which I thought was really interesting. We ended that set of questions with, do you think the overall mental health of your organization is better, worse, or the same than it was 5 years ago? And we chose 5 years ago because we wanted to go pre-pandemic.
Yep.
Most of them said it was the same, which is what I would have anticipated. Okay. But twice as many said it was better as those who said it was worse. So I'm wondering if the attention to a certain degree on a lot of what's been going on in the last few years has really kind of helped, maybe, the attention to addiction, which really has increased significantly. The attention at many firms to try to get more resources out there. And possibly we're seeing at least some perspective that it might be making a difference.
I think that is such an encouraging data point to see because, yeah, the amount of those that would say we're aware of it and it's worse is half of many that say we're aware of it and because of our awareness we're now better. Because yeah, absolutely, COVID was a huge awakening. I mean, prior to COVID, the only person really out there making a lot of noise was Cal Bayer with the Construction Industry Association for Suicide Prevention. And since COVID, that's been so much, such a light shown on that. And so you can really see that. And I think to your point, the challenge with that mid-level, just because executives say, yes, we need it, and they hire someone and you have training and you offer it, doesn't mean that foreman that's on the job site is really actually there and encouraging and participating in the role that they're supposed to play as a leader and as a mentor. And so I think that's that leadership and that culture piece that still needs to disseminate down. And part of it may be because leadership doesn't truly buy in; they're just kind of checking the box. And that's where you see a lot of that nuance that is potentially showing up in the bias of those numbers too, because that's why I always love surveys, is they're only as good as the bias of the people that are taking them, right?
Exactly. That's the key thing about our research in particular. It's market research. We're showing where the industry's at, what they're thinking, and that's a key thing to always keep in mind. So, I know that you guys have looked really at inclusiveness, and a lot of people think that maybe, this larger stigma about mental illness can be maybe, is somehow connected. There's sort of that culture thing. If we can get at the culture, make it more inclusive in general, you can kind of start addressing that. I'm curious about what you're finding to be the relationship between inclusive practices and talent retention.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, again, lately, especially as of late, I've been a big DEI advocate and trying to push for that. But I, am admittedly a white male that is in the construction that fits sort of that typical stereotype as well. And so, in a way of pushing it, though, I guess the way that I can relate is as a technologist, as someone that comes from that BIM VDC role, there was a big conversation in this industry is what is the career path for a BIM or a VDC engineer or manager? And now 10 years later, you can see that some are directors of innovation, others have moved on to software companies, others have left the industry altogether. But a lot of them, we haven't really answered that question of what is that longer term career path for these newer roles in the industry. And I think that is having an impact on our talent. So inclusiveness, it is not just the typical DEI inclusive that is of course hugely important to diversity of thought and bringing innovation and all the kind of core practices of what makes innovation important and what makes it thrive. But I think there's something to this talent retention, which is such a big conversation right now, that we can really use inclusive practices to increase our talent retention. But moving on, I guess the recent DEI study, I know you guys are doing much more studies than we are on this topic, and I'm definitely curious to learn what numbers and things you're seeing from the industry as far as investments in DEI and what companies are doing on that topic.
Yeah, we were lucky. We got a chance to partner with the General Services Administration on a big smart market report on this topic because we work with industry partners who fund our studies, and you don't always find someone who's going to fund something like DEI. So it was really exciting to see the GSA step up and really try to address an issue they thought was important in the industry. So we did that study with architects and general contractors and trade contractors. And there were some kind of interesting differences. When you look at just the contractors, our split in participation between GCs and trades was about 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 GCs, 1/3 trades. But we saw some real differences in attitude. When you looked at the responses, you could kind of tease out that, the architects were sort of like thinking about it as the right thing to do, the sort of aspirational approach, which is wonderful. But the contractors were far more tactical, but we're doing a lot because they were far more tactical. Do you know what I mean? So they were thinking about it really in terms of talent retention. They really view it as this valuable tool for that, and talent attraction too, of course, and just finding new sources of talent. That that there's such a skilled worker shortage. I think everyone wants to be able to draw in anyone who can bring value to the industry. So, the study definitely showed that this is an industry, both sides, architects and contractors, in progress, though. It was definitely not a slam dunk, oh, we're in great shape. It's always going to be a process, DEI. It's never going to be completed. But we're not at the middle of that process yet. We're engaged, but we've got a ways to go still. Size played a huge difference in that. Large contractors, probably because they have the resources and a few other things, but large contractors you know, 43% of them demonstrated a really high level of engagement based on all the practices that we asked about. Only about 10% of the rest of the contractors were able to do so. By the way, as a quick note, one of the practices that we did ask about was, you know, whether you have a clear, you know, career path that you lay out for your workers. So, you know, that issue that you raised, yeah, that is dead on, you know, because it affects everyone, and it especially affects everyone if you look at the leadership, and the leadership looks very different. Maybe because of race, maybe because of gender, maybe because of sexual orientation, but also, as you point out, because of skills, because of what leadership is traditionally what parts of the organization leadership traditionally came from. So, and that was definitely something that we wanted to make sure was included in that. We did see some real benefits reported, though. That, you know, of course, the top benefit was that they saw the most, that they felt like their efforts led to a more inclusive and positive workplace culture. Just, I don't want to undermine, that's very important. But one feels like that's sort of table stakes, right? If you're investing in DEI, that's what you really want to get out of it. If you're not getting that out of it, you know, you're going to wonder what's going on. But you know, we also saw when we asked the contractors, now I'm focusing on particular, about their top 5 benefits. In addition to more inclusive and positive workplace culture, they said better worker and staff retention, increased access to skilled labor, increased ability to recruit workers and staff. You know, really, again, that sharp focus on bringing more people in and helping the industry in that way. And you know, with the shortage that we are consistently reporting of skilled workers in the industry, it's really, really important right now to think about this. You know, and it plays on a lot of different levels. You know, if you create this inclusive culture, you might be more likely to hang on to the people you've invested time and energy into training, because you know, the problem is, you know, sometimes you have to give the workers the skills they need. Lots of times you have to do that. And, you know, you want to make sure you have a good chance of keeping those workers for a little while. And then, you know, some of the other benefits that were cited by those who were highly engaged in DEI include improved ability to resolve challenges that arise on site, increased safety, which is not really a surprise, and expanded perspectives for decision making. And you know, these are a little abstract, but they're really, really key.
I would love to ask a question to the same audience of, do you think your company has an issue with talent retention? And then ask them, do you think your company has an issue with DEI? And the number ones that say, we have an issue with talent retention, but we don't have an issue with DEI. You go, well, no, yeah, you do. They're not understanding that correlation between the two, right? Because
I think a lot of them aren't. No, I think that's true.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's great to see the data that's really showing that. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So all right. So you know, I know that CPC has expanded beyond just, you know, talking about typical topics related to technology integration to tackle these kind of softer topics. You know, what has led you guys to get to that point? You know, why is this a big focus for you right now, and what's come out of it?
Yeah, so this really came out of the virtual roundtables, which again, without COVID, and everybody, you know, forced themselves to get on Zoom and turn on a camera. Remember, you know, before 2020, we never turned cameras on, even though you had the ability to. And so getting people being more open, like it was already kind of vulnerable and be open to be home and to be sharing camera. So why not talk about uncomfortable topics like mental health and inclusion and all these things that were top of mind and going on in the world? So the more, you know, we could be an outlet for those who share technology construction mindedness around these very universal topics of mental health, inclusion, diversity, and realizing that the core principles underneath them are very similar to the challenges. Again, our hashtag is shared pains, because again, whether you're an architect, you're an engineer, you're a contractor, or those providing software and technology to them, we all share in these pains of not really understanding and having empathy for the other side and building a really fair solution, because we're working in frankly sort of a rigged system for most contracts in unless you're in a progressive design build or an IPD type project. So I think that the fact that we can now meld these topics with contracts, with technology is so important for us to be better stewards to leadership, and to be able to expose them to this and help them be aware so that they invest in all these great initiatives. But again, yeah, or if you want to say that or other things, but I think we already gave a shout out to, again, Cal Bayer and the CIASP efforts. We also did, I have to give credit to Sasha Reed with Procore.org, Alice Loong with Brick and Mortar Ventures, and the folks at YOPS and NAWIC, who are all supporting a survey that we did, again, cross-industry, not looking just at your company, because typically if you get an employee satisfaction survey or an exit survey from your company, you're probably going to answer it in, again, a little bit different bias way. That's why market reports are great, right? Because you don't necessarily share that bias, you have that anonymity. But with this, we want to share the same anonymity, but capture a lot of those demographics information that typically we wouldn't capture in these types of surveys. And I think by looking at talent retention as that focal topic of why you should take the survey. Oh, and by the way, we've got these DEI questions at the back end. We got some really interesting data about why people are leaving and how that differs across these different DEI categories. And so it was really interesting data to see, and stuff that, yeah, again, in the future, we should, yeah, look at ways that we can, better collaborate and share data. But definitely curious to know what upcoming research and things you guys got working as far as helping keep workers be safer and healthier.
Well, as I mentioned, that safety report that we do with CPWR, we're starting the next one. We're just preparing the research on the next one right now. So that survey is going to launch sometime in the late spring. So, and as I said, the focus is shifting because we really feel like we've established a lot of pieces. So we wanted to open up a little bit of space in the survey to look at some stuff we haven't looked at before. One of the things we're focusing on is pre-task planning, which is critical to do. Help work, again, empowering workers for one thing, really, really important for that. We're also looking at like the heat exposure and what companies are doing to really safeguard the health of their workers, because that's we all know heat is a growing problem, and it's a growing problem pretty much everywhere. And what used to work 10, 15 years ago might not cover what you're experiencing now. We're also touching a little bit on anti-harassment training. Now, only a couple of questions, but I'll be interested to see what comes out of that, because again, there's all that stuff around, ditching stigmas of various types. This could be an interesting way to get into that. We are keeping though the technology focus and the brief but important look that we do on mental health and substance abuse that we've had in the previous ones, because we want to see how that is tracking over time.
I love that, especially as we come into Construction Safety Week. The pre-task plans is always an interesting one, because it's a great example that I use to say, here's something that technology shouldn't replace, because the whole reason you do a pre-task plan is to go through that thought process. And so the handwriting of it out, even though you may not be collecting the data, there's actually the benefit is in doing that. And same thing with heat exposure, something that like there are certain measurements that you can do in the air or measurements on the body. Like there's so much stuff with technology today that we can do better indicators, but there's always that question of Big Brother, are we comfortable sharing that data? So I think, yeah, it'd be very interesting to see how that survey data comes out. And
it's funny, in the Civil Quarterly that we have coming out this month in April, we actually featured a couple of companies who are using data to improve their safety programs. And one of them talked about how they have this very elaborate checklist. And they said, it seems kind of tedious at first, but they say just doing our checklist is a learning opportunity. Because if someone's relatively new to our company and they have to go through all the 20 questions about how well anchored something is, they're going to kind of get the message about all the things that they're expected to keep in mind when they're dealing with stuff. So, it's that I know what you mean. It's more about the interaction than it is necessarily how you're making that interaction happen.
Yeah, next time you go to the doctor or next time you get on an airplane, look at how many checklists they have, and look at how almost annoyingly redundant it is, but it's because those things are so important to go through that process that they take the time to do it. So again, it comes back to culture and understanding and what's really driving you. Is it about getting it done and being finished fast, or is it about doing it right? And so, yeah, coming back to the right motivations is really what it's all about.